Warning! There will be major spoilers for Season 8, Episode 3 of Game of Thrones in this video. Also, I don't mean to bash George R. R. Martin with this video in any way. No animals were harmed in the making of this video. Which other disclaimers should I use? Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kat and I write children's fiction. I had an idea for starting a little series on my channel which I would like to call Learning from the Masters, and the basic idea is just to take writing that I really like, have a closer look and kind of see what we can learn from it, what could be improved, and just to apply those things to our own writing. This series is just a little exercise to kind of get into the mindset of reading as a writer, because those are two very different things. If you just read as a reader for entertainment purposes, you might enjoy the story or not enjoy the story, but you might not necessarily really think about the mechanics of the writing and the writing style and try to analyze why the story is working for you or why it's not working for you. And yeah, so this is just basically to get us all to the point where we can read as writers. Because the last season of Game of Thrones is currently running and ruining a few lives along the way, let's be honest. I decided that the first person that I will critique is George R. R. Martin and his Song of Ice and Fire series. George R. R. Martin wrote a lot of other stuff. I checked out some of his work, but to be honest, I wasn't super impressed, so I'm just gonna ignore that for today. Let's start out with all the things that I think are great and that are the reason why this series became so hugely popular. One thing that George R. R. Martin is extremely good at is writing great characters that are flawed and extremely interesting. I mean, ask 50 different people who's their favorite character in the book series, and you will probably get around 30 different answers. So, what makes those characters so great? In my opinion, it's that each and every one of them has their own motivations and goals and hopes and dreams, and all of those motivations are really deeply rooted in who the character is and how they grew up and the surroundings that shaped them. This is illustrated pretty well when we look at a very prominent family in the story, the Lannisters. There's a little game I like to play in my head, which is kind of like, I imagine them when you have the start of the Olympic Games and all the runners always pass the torch to each other. So I kind of feel like this is what happened with the Lannister characters and how we hate them. So at first there's Joffrey. Great acting, of course, also in the show, but even in the books, everybody hated this character, this spoiled brat, such an awful person. But then he passes his little torch of hatred onto his mother, because then you find out that he's a product of incest and that he just grew up extremely spoiled and entitled, and that maybe it's not entirely Joffrey's fault that he's just mentally unhinged and a bit crazy. So we hate Cersei instead. But then you kind of find out that Cersei is also just a product of her father, because she grew up as a twin, even though she's technically the oldest and almost as old as her brother. They grew up differently. She's the smarter one. She knows how to play the Game of Thrones. Yet she was always given less importance, and she was married off to Robert Baratheon, who is cruel to her, who doesn't love her. So she kind of was always underestimated and not loved. She kind of is just a product of her environment as well. And so we kind of start hating Tywin Lannister, her father, for that, because How is he just such a cruel man to bring up his children in this way? He only loves Jaime, he has no respect for Cersei, and he obviously doesn't like Tyrion much. And so we kind of start hating him. But then we learn that he kind of had to be this way because his father before him managed the Lannister finances extremely poorly, and also just his general behavior made House Lannister the laughingstock of the Seven Kingdoms. And only once Tywin came in with his iron fist, crushed the rebellion, and restored the house to its former glory, they're the richest people around and everybody respects them. So you could argue he kind of did the right thing, because without him there wouldn't be a House Lannister. You kind of just know where the characters are coming from. Most of the characters, at least. You kind of really understand and see all of their motivations, and I think that's really extremely interesting. It makes for great characters, and it also makes for great conflict. And before you start writing things in the comments, yes, I know that all of these things are not perfect excuses for many actions, but at least they're a good explanation. And even the traditionally good characters such as Ned Stark are deeply flawed. Think about it. Ned Stark's goodness ultimately led him to his downfall, and his insistence on honor and keeping a secret to his sister had pretty bad consequences for the people around him. Thing number 2 that Martin is good at is taking you by surprise. Among other things, by killing main characters. So I think if you know the series, you know that nobody's safe. It really ups the stakes, it really makes you fear for your favorite characters, and it also adds a touch of realism. And it also allows for just more interesting twists and turns. Point number 3 kind of ties into the first 2 points, which is that Martin kind of manages to give you a sense of realism in this fantastic world. So I already talked about the amazing characters that just feel real, and also the fact that the good guys don't always win in Martin's stories, which is unfortunately something that also happens in the real world. Apart from that, Martin also has different languages, for example, and there are also linguistic barriers that come with this. He has different cultures and the culture clashes that come with it. He has different sexualities, and those sexualities are accepted in some parts of the world and not in other parts of the world. He has different religions, and there's a shift of religions happening in the books. So I think he really managed to paint a very rich, diverse society that is interesting to experience. Thing number 4 that George R. Martin does pretty well is breaking taboos and also breaking genre convention. So think about all of the taboos that are being broken. I mean, incest, prostitution, rape, all of those things. And also he breaks genre conventions by having all of those great characters, because fantasy is mostly inspired by medieval literature and medieval tropes. And in medieval literature, you have a very good idea who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. So I think George R. Martin kind of breaks down all of these structures, but he doesn't only do it for the shock value. It kind of feels natural in his stories. Thing number 5 that I think is the main factor why George R. Martin's writing is so intriguing is that he actually didn't write a fantasy, he wrote a political thriller in a fantasy setting. I think this is really one of the main reasons why people are so invested in the story, because there's just a lot of stuff going on. There are power dynamics, there are intrigues. It's kind of sometimes a bit like a soap opera, like it's so addictive. So you just keep watching because you want to know in the end who will have the upper hand. And I think that's really great. I think that it's interesting that in this universe, magic isn't the magic fix for everything. So now that we looked at some of the things that make Martin's writing really, really great in my opinion, let's look at some of the things that I personally don't like that much. Mistake number 1 is that George R. Martin doesn't know when to stop. Maybe you know this, but A Song of Ice and Fire was originally supposed to be a short story. Then it turned out there's way too much content for that. So George R. Martin decided to make it a trilogy. And then there was too much content for that. So what did he do? He just wrote a 4th book and ended it there. Oh no, wait, that's what he should have done. Instead, he decided it had to be either 3 books or 7. Why? Just why? We're 5 books in now, and to be honest, I might not read book number 6 and 7 because I kind of feel that it started to drag. Many of the characters I was rooting for are dead. He introduced new and important characters in book 5, which is like, we're now supposed to care about this character? Like, that's not how it works. So I really just wish he would have stopped when it was time to stop and just write 4 books, maybe 5 books, and just finish the story when it's supposed to be finished. And I know that many people might disagree with that. I know that many people enjoy epic long fantasies and think the more books the better. But I'm really just in favor of letting a story end where the ending feels natural. And if it takes 4 books or 7 books, the number shouldn't be important. The natural flow of the story should be important. Mistake number 2 is that Martin doesn't explore the magical and fantastical elements of his story enough. So Martin stated in an interview that he believes in the judicious use of magic in epic fantasy, and you can kind of see that in his writing. So it just feels like the dragons and the White Walkers just got added on, just like slapped on top to market this whole story as a fantasy, but that he didn't really want to include them. And now there's gonna be a season 8 episode 3 spoiler here, so skip to this time if you don't want to know. But basically, you can see that there's a problem with that when Arya kills the Night King, and that's not the climax of the story. There's still 3 more episodes to go, and the show is supposed to parallel what Martin originally envisioned as an ending, so that's also a problem with his story in the books. It just kind of feels like the whole storyline with the White Walkers was kind of added on. It was artificially made into a problem, but it's not the whole storyline. And this way it just kind of felt anticlimactic. And to be honest, I was a bit disappointed that I invested so much time and just emotion in this White Walker storyline when it wasn't even the main storyline. I'm not saying that George R. Martin should have more fantasy in his universe because it's his choice after all, and there are books such as The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley that handle this very well. So in her book she also doesn't have a whole lot of magic, but it just kind of feels natural and integrated into the story. Whereas with A Song of Ice and Fire, I just felt like, you know, the dragons, the White Walkers, Bran being the three-eyed raven, all of those fantastical elements, they are just slapped on and used whenever they're convenient, but the rest of the time they're never really explained or they're just like glossed over. Martin should have either respected genre expectations by just integrating the fantastical elements a bit better, or just not made it a fantasy and he should have gone for the historic fiction. So mistake number 3 is that he has too many storylines. And again, many people will disagree with me here, but yeah, I just think that there are too many storylines and some of them don't really add to the book. Let's take the whole thing with the White Walkers again. Only just before the story comes to a conclusion, I basically found out that that wasn't the main storyline, and that the main storyline is who will end up on the Iron Throne. So yeah, I felt a bit cheated, and kind of just there's this whole issue with the Iron Islands and who will rule those, and Sansa's storyline is very different in the book, and I don't think her arc is going the right way in the books. So I just feel like there are all those loose threads and that I'm actually missing the main thread. Okay, so this is all I got for you today. Again, this video is probably very subjective. And for that reason exactly, I would love to hear from you. I would really want to know if, you think I'm completely wrong about some of the points that I mentioned, or if you agree with me on some of them. I would love to know why you think this is a great story, or why you don't like it maybe. If you have even read it, if you're interested in reading it, and if I just spoiled the entire book for you, I'm so sorry. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below. And also, if you have suggestions for future books that I should analyze, please also let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so this was the video for today. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you want to. Follow me on all of my other social media. I will link it down below. And have a great day. I will see you next Tuesday. Bye.